Hello friends, welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today I'm proud to say that my wife and I have finished our partner read of Don Quixote in the original Spanish after nearly a year after starting it. And we took a long break between part 1 and 2. I do have a video up for where I talk about part 1 and my reaction to part 1. That will be number 34, Don Quixote for Spain. You can look back in the archives of my videos and check that one out if you have not read Don Quixote already. This video is going to be primarily for people who have already read it or do not care about anything getting spoiled, because I will spoil the ending, which was incredibly moving and left both my wife and I in tears. So I do want to be very clear that this video will be full of spoilers, and that I do recommend that you experience it for yourself if you have plans to do so, or if you already know how it ends, then I suppose you can go ahead and listen. But I did not. At least I knew one element of it, but not the other, and it was a big difference. So I'll get into that later. But anyway, I recommend, if you are checking out Don Quixote, I've listened to audio versions of the Edith Grossman and John Rutherford parts of them, and they do sound very good. Of course, like I said, read it in the original Spanish, but I also read parts of it in the old John Ormsby translation, and I got this edition more so for the beautiful illustrations, which I'm going to show off at the end of the video. If you're just interested in those, maybe you can skip forward. Just to give you an example, like here's the first one. Just beautiful illustrations by Eddie Legrand. And this is the Easton Press edition. I found it at a local half-price books near my location, and absolutely treasure this edition, even if the translation isn't the finest. It's a little out. I mean, it's probably the best of the older translations, but it is a bit outdated. That being said, I almost do think it captures how Cervantes actually sounds in Spanish, more so than some of the newer translations, but the newer translations are more readable. And there are definitely translations, like for example, Edith Grossman calling Don Quixote the sad-faced knight, his first kind of knight name that Sancho kind of gives him. Sad-faced knight, I think, is a much better translation than Knight of the Rueful Countenance that Ormsby uses, because in Spanish, El Caballero de la triste figura, triste figura, sad-faced knight, it's almost the same rhythm, and triste being sad is a much more simple word. It's much better to use a simple word there, I think, than rueful countenance. So just some, I guess, my takes on the translation, if that's all you want to hear about. But now it's time to talk about the actual book. And wow, I've been kind of left, I'm not going to lie, since finishing this a few days ago, it's been hard to shake the feeling of like loss and sort of a little bit of melancholy. It's left me in a bit of melancholy after finishing this book. Why? Final spoiler warning. And please, if you haven't read it, the adventures in this book, I could spoil a lot of things. I could tell you about the Cave of Montesinos, the recurring characters from part 1. One of my favorite characters, Sansón Carrasco. I could tell you about him appearing in the guise of a knight known as the Knight of Mirrors, El Caballero de los Espejos. I could tell you all this stuff, but I really think don't let me spoil the end. So that's the final warning. Now I'm going to begin. I expected Don Quixote to die. And I expected him to die in a way that would leave me feeling sad and tragic. But I did not expect the recovering of his sanity, not only to be, in some sense, implied the cause of his death, but the recovering of his sanity to be even sadder and more heartbreaking than his passing itself. And that was, to me, the greatest shock. And that's kind of what what hit both my wife and I as we were reading it. It was like we were reading the last chapters like through tears. It was a real moment. And it's very strange to just think back about how Cervantes, especially reading the introduction in my Ormsby English edition here, and I haven't read any of the critical essays in this Real Academia Española Spanish edition. But Cervantes wrote this to be supposedly a satire of chivalry, and I still, having read a few things, I still think that was actually his true intention. I think the end does show disdain for chivalry, but in this moment, I was not thinking that. I couldn't. When I finished this book, I was like, how can anyone see this as a satire now, having finished it? And even reading the book again, if it is a satire, it's certainly not one that would make me laugh. It's everything about this book, having finished it, is now tainted with heartbreak, knowing how it ends. And, well, not tainted, but you know what I mean, colored by heartbreak. And another extraordinarily heartbreaking thing about the ending is how he's Don Quixote, he's almost at it again. He gets defeated by the bachiller Sanson Carrasco, who, in fact, and I'm going to develop this idea in a little bit. I actually found Sanson Carrasco to be the character that I identified with the most and saw myself in the most. And I'm going to talk about that a little later. And the one I'm kind of most fascinated with, even though he makes only 2 appearances, or three appearances in the entire book, or 4, I guess, depending how you count it. 3 major appearances, right? And he's a very important character because, of course, he's the one that, as the Knight of the Half Moon, I can't remember what his final name was, but on a beach in Barcelona, he takes Don Quixote down, and after defeating him in combat, we'll call it, he makes Sanson Carrasco makes Don Quixote swear to give up his adventuring for 1 year. His whole motive was he had good motives. He was trying to help Don Quixote and had pure motives. However, Don Quixote, going back to his village, he starts to realize, when earlier in the book, like when animals would trample over him and Sancho, he wouldn't recognize them as animals. He would see 2 sheep, sheeps in the distance as 2 armies in part 1. Now, when animals run over him, he sees them as swine. He sees them as pigs, and he says this is what he deserves for being defeated, or something to that effect. And this road back to La Mancha is sad. But then he starts to talk about being a pastor for a year, and he gets everybody excited about it. He gets Sancho excited about it. The Sanson Carrasco, the priest who burned all his books. He gets the barber. They're all excited about going out in the fields and being pastors and singing songs, and it's like a whole nother adventure awaits. But then Don Quixote just gets struck by this fever, and his sanity returns, and he dies suddenly. I mean, I don't even want to talk about the fact that I know Cervantes, somebody was plagiarizing Don Quixote, so he had to kill him off just so that nobody else would ever do it. There's so much. This isn't even about. I'm not trying to analyze Cervantes or do all this stuff. I'm just trying to, yeah, again, my reaction, and share this reaction of the book to you, and my personal reaction. And I'm still kind of in the middle of it and very affected by it. And yeah, so that's what was so tragic to me. And uh, but there's this really interesting thing that Ormsby writes. Let me pull it up quick here. So the translator Ormsby in this introduction writes something very interesting, and this is kind of what convinced me that though I and so many others cry about Don Quixote and find the ending of this book so sad, this is what Ormsby has to say in his introduction. To call Don Quixote a sad book, preaching a pessimist view of life, argues a total misconception of its drift. It would be so if its moral were that, in this world, true enthusiasm naturally leads to ridicule and discomfiture. But it preaches nothing of the sort. Its moral, so far as it can be said to have one, is that the spurious enthusiasm that is born of vanity and self-conceit, and that is made an end in itself, not a means to an end, that acts on mere impulse, regardless of circumstances and consequences, is mischievous to its owner and a very considerable nuisance to the community at large. To those who cannot distinguish between the one kind and the other, no doubt Don Quixote is a sad book. No doubt to some minds it is very sad that a man who has just uttered so beautiful a sentiment as that "it is a hard case to make slaves of those whom God and nature made free," should be ungratefully pelted by the scoundrels his crazy philanthropy had let loose on society. But to others of a more judicial cast, it will be a matter of regret that reckless, self-sufficient enthusiasm is not oftener requited in some such way for all the mischief it does in the world. And at first when I read that, I was like, man, this Ormsby guy, he has a cold heart of stone. How can you not feel for Don Quixote? But then, despite all the sadness and everything, I really started thinking about it. And this probably reflects, I'm sure there's a lot of commentary people can do about how this is like Ormsby's time, and the idea of conforming to society in his time was a much stronger pull than this sort of individualistic follow your dreams that all of us nowadays identify with in Don Quixote. And that's why we see more of ourselves in Don Quixote than the people who want to suppress him, right? But perhaps in Ormsby time, as he's saying, there were a lot of these enthusiastic people out there that are very vain and full of vanity and seeking vanity as an end in itself. People with a lot of power and a lot of money, and even in the throes of sadness at the end of the book, my wife and I both noticed this. What is it that his maid servant in the house says to him? This is very important. Yeah, so the housekeeper, she says, no, the niece says, "What's this, uncle? Now that we were thinking you had come back to stay at home and lead a quiet, respectable life there, are you going to get into fresh entanglements and turn young shepherd, thou that comest here, young shepherd going there? Nay, indeed, the straw is too hard now to make pipes of." And, added the housekeeper, "will your worship be able to bear out in the fields the heats of summer and the chills of winter and the howling of wolves? Not you, for that's a life and a business for hardy men, bred and seasoned to such work almost from the time they were in swaddling clothes. Why, to make choice of evils, it's better to be a knight-errant than a shepherd. Look here, senor, take my advice, and I'm not giving it to you full of bread and wine, but fasting and with 50 years upon my head, stay at home, look after your affairs, go often to confession, be good to the poor, and upon my soul be it, if any evil comes to you. It's like, it's, why Don Quixote at 50 years old? And again, I definitely see the side of relating to Don Quixote, but I'm trying also to take another look at it. That I thought Ormsby had a really good point here, and that's, yeah, why not just be content with your life? Don Quixote has it good. He has some money. He has all the means to live a normal, content life in his village, and it's like, why go off adventuring or he spends money frivolously on things throughout this book. He's hardly even thinking of money, in fact. But it's like, why not just give that to the poor? And it's this sort of like, I think there's, rich and poor alike can relate to Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. But let's not forget about the fact that Don Quixote does cause damage to others who are simply trying to get by, damage to their property, damage to their livelihood. And while, but his good side, he also shows how he's a reflection of the royalty, in fact, in this book, the Duke and Duchess, who go to extraordinary ends to make him, to play their jokes on him, and just like watch what he does and how he reacts, is such, Don Quixote is almost a critical mirror and reflection of the nobility of his time. And I wonder if Cervantes wasn't aware of what he was doing there. There's even somebody in the book says, like, the Duke and Duchess are pretty much as crazy as Don Quixote for going to such crazy lengths to play these jokes. They invest massive amounts of resources, ordering their servants and people to do all these things. Altisidora is really only one of them, and just these bizarre lengths to satisfy their own indulgence and vanity, to play these jokes. And it's reflective of also, in a sense, what Don Quixote is doing. Like, does he really, one has to question as you're reading this, does he care more about the ideals of chivalry, or seeing himself on a pedestal, embodying these ideals? All valid questions. And but now I want to be clear, none of this makes me feel any happier about the end of the book. None of this makes me like, there's still an immense sadness that I feel, and even if you take this sort of Ormsby perspective, just the fact that at the end Don Quixote says this, that he only wishes that he would have realized sooner, and goes to the extreme of saying that all books of chivalry are evil, and it's like, can't there be some gray area here? But no, Don Quixote was never one for gray areas in these things. And so it's kind of a similar thing as one of my good friends said. Almost all of the people he's known that have strong political viewpoints and end up changing their viewpoint tend to go to the opposite extreme. So yeah, if you have a very, say, left-wing communist who suddenly repents of their foolish ways, they go to the way extreme end of like of far right, libertarianism or something like that. It's there's this sort of like radical personality that will go to those sorts of extremes but sometimes change in their life. And uh, Don Quixote is very much that kind of figure, a reckless idealism, but at the heart of it really is, this sort of egotistical vanity that is reflective of our modern age. And yeah, the final thing I guess I wanted to touch on was how I see myself, and I actually sympathize almost the most in the whole story with El Bachiller Sanson Carrasco for being the one that uh, slays Quixote. Not really slays him, he just knocks him off his horse and then tells him to go take a break for a year, right? It seems very harmless. It seems very well intentioned. And in my mind, Carrasco, even though he appears so little, for a person who is reading this, I think in more of a maybe a time in their life where they care more just about stability, becoming more mature, um, looking at things from a more practical and balanced perspective, like somewhere in the middle between Sancho Panza and Don Quixote. Carrasco is the character that, to me, represents that ideal and kind of what I have taken to be my ideals as well, and kind of like I feel like the one kind of trying to tame the Don Quixote within me, but can't help feeling a little bit nostalgic and sad for it, even if it's not it's not to the extreme of Don Quixote where I'm saying like, oh, you shouldn't go off recklessly in adventure, and it's at all costs you shouldn't do what I did. I don't have that kind of repentance about my past. In fact, I think it all worked out pretty good, but and I'm not here to talk about myself. That's the vanity thing I was just on, but also the the fact that not only is Sanson Carrasco trying to tame the adventurous spirit of Don Quixote, he's trying to tame his self-absorption, his vanity, and it's I don't know, maybe this is a new take. Maybe this is an interesting take. It's not one that I've read anywhere. I've never heard anyone say that they feel sorry. But why do I feel sorry for Sanson Carrasco? Is because he's kind of the one that takes the blame, and he's probably the one that after the death of Don Quixote has the greatest struggle in his conscience for bringing Don Quixote to his end. And even the nobleman in Barcelona who says to him, "What have you done? You've Don Quixote was worth so much more as a madman than as a sane man." But again, remember, this is the upper class speaking, lovers of tales of chivalry. It's this vain and uncaring upper class who will give a man like Sancho Panza a government for a few weeks, just as a joke, or 10 days as it is in the case, even though Sancho is the one who renounces it. It kind of seems like they were planning to get him thrown out anyway. So what kind of upper class who laments the loss of their clown, their buffoon, their jester Don Quixote are we actually talking about here? So I don't want to fall into this sort of like sentimental romanticism, mourning the loss of Don Quixote, even though I think the world does need a little bit of madness. I'm trying to see the gray. Don Quixote to me is all about a struggle for the reader to see the gray, and I find that most in Sanson Carrasco. Even though he has a kind of a not many pages, he has a huge part to play, and he's kind of he's a sort of a well-intentioned pseudo-intellectual like myself. So it's just a great match, and he's the one that's struggling, whose conscience is going to be struggling the most after this book. But I have faith that if I were to, write the continuation of his story, it would be a rather boring, mediocre life, perhaps much in the vein of many of my favorite books that I've read about mediocre lives and how we can find the the epic and the great and the mediocre, um, without necessarily focusing that on ourselves or trying to project a fictitious ideal of how the world should be onto it, which is something I've really been struggling lately. If you've listened to my previous videos about Children of the Alley and so on. So, yeah, that is my take on Don Quixote, and I will, I'll briefly here just show some more of these wonderful images, from this Easton Press edition, which I believe you can get your hands on pretty affordably. I did, but I'm incredibly lucky to even know it exists just by stumbling across it at this bookstore, and it really captures not only the grittiness, the grimness of the actual world, but shows Don Quixote looking beyond it and seeing what's in his head, and it's yeah, and I'm sure, as sure can be, that if I come back to this book later in life, there's the famous windmill and giants scene. If I come back to this later in life, I'm sure I will see new things and have new takes, but I don't know if I will, honestly. I feel like I don't know. It's so sad either way. Either way you look at it, the story of Don Quixote is so close to home and so sad for so many reasons, that it's hard to read the rest of the book the same way. Even when I was re-listening and rereading, I noticed, for example, that the El Curioso Impertinente, or the story that Cervantes wrote in part one that he inserted, that in the book it actually says that Cervantes wrote it. So Cervantes put his own little story inside the book, and he's a character in an indirect way in the book. So you read that story, kind of, it is also about vanity. It's about a man who wants he's got the perfect wife, the perfect best friend, but he wants to test it. He wants his best friend to test his wife because untested valor is not valor. Untested purity is not purity, he believes. And this is his great error that leads to the downfall of his whole life around him. I think it's significant. I think it's significant that Cervantes, maybe he didn't intend it that way, but the idea that the book that Cervantes wrote in the universe of Don Quixote almost tells the same moral as the story of Don Quixote about not appreciating what we have, about being too self-absorbed, about being careful about our own vanity and the mischief it can cause in the world, as Ormsby said. So, yeah, here's the Yangüeses. I don't want to show everyone in here, but I would definitely recommend this edition just for the illustrations. They're absolutely incredible. Even if the translation isn't the greatest that might be out there. All right, well, thank you for tuning in for today's long wrap-up of part 2 of Don Quixote. It's been a long ride. The next big read, that partner read that we've been thinking about doing, is Moby Dick. And I know I've already done some United States books, like Reading the States, but it's, those are some of, I feel personally, the worst videos I've done, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to continue reading the States. Honestly, I may just replace them with one good video, hopefully about Moby Dick. We'll see. Or maybe I'll continue it. It's still up in the air. But I definitely will continue with reading the world and putting uh, most of my reading energy into that. So, yeah, that is all for today. I can finally color Spain off my map. So I hope you enjoyed and take care, and we'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World. So, now that I have read Don Quixote, I can finally cross Spain off my map here. Or I should say color it in. Hopefully that pink isn't too similar to Portugal's red. Give me a sec to do this better. Okay, we can't forget these islands here either. And we're just gonna pretend that Andorra somewhere in here doesn't exist. I don't even think I'm gonna read a book for Andorra, to be honest. But yeah, there you have it. 71 countries.